October 25th, 2007. The greatest thing ever to be produced by the human race would hit store shelves. And what product is that, you might ask? The critically acclaimed masterpiece that is M&M's Kart Racing would hit store shelves, and it marks the beginning of an era. It wouldn't be until around 6 years later that people appreciated the true arts of gaming. In 2013, multiple people would start streaming M&M's Kart Racing on Twitch, including Crash Bandicoot speedrunner Back and multiple other streamers messed around with this game, but sadly, not too much is archived. Back has 2 videos archived from September 2013 of him messing around in the game. One video is him demonstrating how computer players are impossible to beat when using a slower kart. Someone must have playtested the game on the fastest kart and simply called it a day. The other video is him messing around on the track Sea Carrier, which is debatably the most broken track in the game. We will get more into details surrounding that later on. Over the next couple of years, there wasn't really anything too much to note. In 2014 though, popular streamer Vinesauce would start a series called Shovelware Showcase where he would play notably bad games that his fans would send him. In his second installment of the series, he featured off M&M's Kart Racing and exposed the game to thousands of people who presumably had never seen it before. This video is specifically how I first found the game. It made me realize that quality control is not always a thing in video games. On April 30th of 2016, yours truly would do the first proper speedrun of M&M's Kart Racing. Ignoring the fact that I am way too young to be streaming in this clip, this marks the beginning of the tournament mode category. My first time was a 44:52. Tournament mode is where you play 3 laps against CPUs on every track in the game. In total, there are 15 tracks, unlike the back of the box that says that there are only 10. Let me give you a quick rundown of every track in the game. Chocolate Factory, the most claustrophobic track in the game. Unless you practice like crazy, you will be crashing on every single turn. It's honestly the worst track to start the game with. The Streets. Unlike Chocolate Factory, there's quite a bit of space. This track is pretty boring in comparison though. The House. Quite a cool concept, besides the fact that the scaling is absolutely horrible. Only one player can fit through the openings inside the house. The Farm. You enter a farm, you leave it, you can barely turn through it. Next. Forest. A glorified loop. The main path is quite tight, but there's many opportunities to drive on the sides. Mountains. One of the more ambitious and longer tracks of the bunch. This track may not be horrible if it wasn't for the fact that they didn't playtest the game at all when it came to inclines and declines. When going downwards, you can't move your direction until you're on flat land again. Beach. This track has a bit of a Chocolate Factory syndrome at the beginning, which leads to the actual beach and has some of the most problematic water that I've ever seen rendered. Sea Carrier. Another ambitious track. This track isn't too bad until you head underground, where you'll see some of the most poorly designed turns in history. If you want any chance of making it here, get ready to use your brake. Arctic. The most boring loop ever. Snow, bridge, snow, bridge. Next. Alien Spacecraft. Another loop but alien themed, I guess. Alien HQ. Wonder what genius thought it was to have a level with 1. A lack of controls, and 2. No barriers for half of the level, but I guess you have it now. Abstract World. Another loop but it's coated in candy. Cool. Chocolate Volcano. Another loop but uglier. Coliseum. Another loop but with a narrow tunnel in between. The Stadium. Nothing like ending the game on yet another loop, and on top of that, the most bland one of the bunch. Now that you are familiarized with the tracks, let's get back to the run. The first speedrun was more of just a casual playthrough. So casual that I wasn't even using the fastest kart. The fastest kart in the game is the 4x4 jet convertible kart that requires you to collect 1,000 coins to unlock. I had just started playing the game, so I didn't have that unlocked at the current time. So instead, I chose the fastest kart that I could use at that very moment, which happened to be the 500cc kart. That wouldn't be too much of an issue the next day, because on May 1st, I would lower the record by a lot. First with a 36.59, and later a 36.10. By this point, I had enough coins to play with the fastest kart. This alone saved a lot of time. On top of this, I obviously had better gameplay due to more experience. On July 10th, Lego Man would just barely snag the record by 2 seconds. He was just a bit over a second ahead of my time entering the final level, and ultimately got a time of 36.08. I wasn't leaving it there though. That same day, within 5 hours of Lego Man's record, I played the game once more, and got the first sub 36 minute time, with a 35.58. I mostly saved time later in the game. It's really hard to go in depth with these runs yet though. The game was still heavily unoptimized. I would come back a month later on August 30th and shave off another 7 seconds, making up a lot of time in tracks like Beach, but then losing a majority of that in Mountains. Again, these times were nowhere near optimized. After this run, the game went quiet for a decent amount of time. The rest of the year had nothing to show. It wouldn't be until February 6, 2017, when Crash Speedrunner Back would yet again return back to the game, and take it to a higher level than ever before. Strap in, cause this is where the run gets quite interesting. Back would beat the record by 20 seconds with a 35.31. This run wasn't perfect by any means, but there were some few notable improvements. Let me introduce you to a new shortcut in the house. If you remember before, the house was a nightmare with having to go through really tight rooms and small openings. Using a new clip that was discovered, you can avoid most of that. It was found that if you shake your Wii remote right as you drive into this fence, you can clip right through. After doing this, it was found that if you drive to a checkpoint inside the house and turn around, you will get a lap count when you reach the finish line. This trick may seem like a huge detour, but be aware, you don't have to worry about traversing inside the tight corners of the house at all. This alone is where the main time save came from. This alone placed Back over 10 seconds ahead of record, just out of house. In the farm, Back found yet another skip, where if you shake your Wii remote at the right time, similar to house, you will jump over this pile of hay. Back didn't do the trick too well in his first run, but this was a good first step in improving the track. It was a lot better than zigzagging the corners inside the barn. This trick would loosely be called hay skip. In Forest, Back used the off-road space to his advantage and cut the corners towards the end, which eventually added up over the 3 laps. Off-road doesn't slow you down, so you can use it to your advantage. While Back did struggle in some other places, such as Sea Carrier, he was able to save some time overall and achieve the new record. Well, at least for a little bit. Just like I did previously, on the same day the record was taken away from me, I got it back. I beat the record by just over 2 seconds with a 35.28. Funnily enough, I didn't go for the new skips in the house or the farm. I saved time just simply through using better driving throughout the run. Back wasn't done though. Later that day, he would return for a second time, do a few more runs, and pump out a 34.46, the first sub 35 run. How did this happen? Well, a majority of it is just getting used to how to drive in the game. While he still had some mistakes, the mistakes were becoming less and less overall. A majority of Back's splits during this run were golds. The more that people learned how to play this game, the more that the times went down. After a very busy day of kart racing, Back's major improvement would silence the game for a bit, well, at least a couple weeks. On February 26, a new player would join the scene. Sakari 2 set a new record by 7 seconds with a 34.39. The driving in these runs were getting cleaner and cleaner. Look at how clean Chocolate Factory is compared to before. On the farm, Sakari became the first person to get all 3 hay skips in a record without slowing down. Back previously did get hay skip, but most of the time he completely bonked and would slow down. Even though there was slop in a lot of places, with decent enough driving, Sakari comfortably had the new record for a decent period of time. Back was not ready to give up. On March 19th, he would do the unthinkable yet again, and smash the record by over 20 seconds, this time with a 34.12. Just like Sakari, Back would get a fast hay skip for all 3 laps. Back would also have better driving than previously thought. For example, on mountains, he would take the turns around these bridges way faster than previously done before. He barely even slowed down. He also had way cleaner turns in the underground section of Sea Carrier, and had a pretty solid alien HQ. There were some notable mistakes though, such as bonking in Beach and Coliseum, but it was still good enough to be another major feat. Just the next day, on March 20th, Back would keep up his crazy streak and get the first 33-minute time with a 33:48. Back would clean up many of his little mistakes, and would also optimize many turns and many tracks. For example, in Sea Carrier, the final turn out of the underground section is done a lot faster with a sharper turn. He also optimized levels such as Alien HQ a bit more. All this cleanup was enough to silence the category for a really long time. The rest of 2017 was completely quiet, and then 2018, and then 2019, and before I keep going forward, let's go talk about something else for a bit. Just 5 months after M&M's Kart Racing made its hot debut on the Wii, the DS would be blessed as well by the same game. You'd think that the games would be pretty similar, but they actually vary quite a bit. In this game, there are only 11 tracks, and even though many of them share the same names as the Wii version, these tracks have nothing in common. To be honest, the tracks in this version are a lot more bland and lack any detail. The other main differences in this game are the fact that there are item boxes instead of just coins, and a jumping mechanic that is more like a hop instead of a minor shake like in the Wii version. Due to how different this version of the game is, it's gotten quite less attention over the years, but let's just talk about the brief history anyways. It wouldn't be until February of 2017 where a runner by the name Lori D. Bunnykins would document a time with a 27:39. Sadly, no footage of this run exists. It wouldn't be until August of 2019 that yet another run would be submitted. Now with footage, the record got improved to a 27:25 by Ava Sam. With how little this version was played, to this day, this is still the current record. After this record was set, only 3 other people would run the game. Parsk would get a 27:57, Swampert Tube would get a best time of 27:29, and Bintendo would get really close to the record, and got a 27:25 just like Ava Sam. Sadly though, this record was roughly 200 milliseconds behind, and this is where the DS version of the game sits to this very day. With how quiet the game had become over the last few years, something new needed to happen. Most racing games have some type of time trial mode, and of course M&M's Kart Racing did as well. In the game is a mode called Training that allows you to play one lap of a track without CPUs. This has led to said racing games having time trial leaderboards. But what about this game? On July 31st of 2019, I would finally add a time trial leaderboard for M&M's Kart Racing and started setting my own times on each track. Throughout the first couple weeks, I would break these records multiple times. After multiple days of playing, multiple other people would get in on the slice of the time trial pie. Let's dissect every single track's record history. Chocolate Factory. On day 1 of runs, I would set a time of 22:96 on Chocolate Factory. For a casual playthrough, this isn't the worst, but there were still quite a lot of noticeable mistakes. The next day, I would completely smash that time, and ultimately got a 22:06. To get this major time cut, a lot of it had to do with not hitting the walls as much. You can see that I stayed at full speed for a longer length during the track. It clearly still wasn't perfect though. Give it another day and I would clean it up some more and get the first 21-second time with a 21:76. Finally a few days would pass, until I beat it again. On August 5th I would get a 21:46, and on August 11th I would get a 21:33. To be honest, I don't even know how this last time was even the record. You can see I hit multiple walls that cost me a lot of time. With the track being very tight and frustrating though, I decided to give up. The rest of August would be quiet. Before moving on, You may notice that all of these times end with a lot of 6 and 3s. Due to the frame rate of the time in this game, time trial records will only end in a 0, 3, or 6. This will lead to many minor time cuts, as well as multiple ties. Back to the runs. Give a warm welcome to frickin' Fricks14. I was so desperate for competition in this game that I actually shipped him the cheapest copy of the game that I could find on eBay. This would lead him to beating many of my times. Before I continue, yes, he does not have a capture card. If you want to whine about it, then feel free to post #FrixBuyACaptureCard in the comments below. Moving on September 5th, he would get the first 20-second time with a 2086. Fricks found that you could completely skip a turn at the beginning by flipping through one of the openings in this wall of bars. To do this, you need to angle your cart in the right position and start shaking your Wii remote to jump as you approach the wall. He also started going for a turn towards the end, where you can clip this box and get a tighter turn. Fricks would continue to lower the time with these strategies and would get a 2026 a month later, and in February of 2020, he would return and get a 2013. With this wall clip strategy, Fricks was getting really close to another second barrier. The elusive 19-second time was looking more and more likely. Fricks would return to this level an entire year later, and in February of 2021 would start to pull the big guns out on Chocolate Factory. With tighter turns, less slowdowns, and aggressive grinding, the journey would start. On February 27th, he would get a 2003, and later that day got a 20-second flat. Just the littlest of time save was needed to get a new second barrier. Fricks claimed that the beginning of his 20 flat run wasn't even that good. He would prove that statement true by getting the first 19-second time with a 1993 on March 1st. And that's where the record currently stands. Fricks said that the time was still beatable, with the biggest improvements being not losing speed on the ending box clip and taking the end turns more aggressively. With how good the clip and overall driving was though, it's safe to say this track would get a lot quieter again. Well, I was gonna say that until the record got beaten twice during the making of this. Fricks would get a slight improvement by another frame with a 1990 on March 14th. This isn't the end of it though. Over the course of the previous month, a new player started to pick up this game by the name of Bluebear. Over the following weeks, he would slowly chip away at his time, with his goal being to eventually get the record. And eventually, he got his wish. Later the same day on the 14th, Bluebear would beat the record by a decent amount with a 1976. He was able to figure out that you can maintain more of your speed while clipping if you take a wider angle before the wall. Here's a quick diagram that he made to explain this. At this point, the track was quite tight. With this new knowledge, Fricks returned a few days later and tied the record. There are probably some more frames to save considering how janky the clip is, but for now, that's where the current time stands. The streets. Moving on to the second track in the game, on my first day of attempts, I would set a 4470 time. Just like all my other times, this was laughably bad at first. I had a lot of sketchy turns and took everything really safe. The next day, the record wouldn't be beaten by me, but by Swaggy P. He would shave some time off with a 4443, then a 4396, and finally a 4366. Time was being shaved off by starting to take corners tighter and tighter. The next day, I would fight back and get a 4353. That was nowhere near the end though. This record got tossed back and forth like a hot potato. A day later, Swaggy would come back with a 4350. I would return the favor a couple days later with a 4346. And the day after that, Swaggy completed a 4340. Another day after, and I tied that to the exact frame. I know that there was a lot to digest in such a short period of time. The time saves on this track are mainly just by taking the corners tighter and tighter. The turn at the very end was notably getting way tighter than ever imagined. Later the same day, another player, Mecam, would take those tight corners to the extreme and got a 4306. Sadly, the Twitch clip of this doesn't seem to exist anymore, as he deleted all his old clips. Be aware of that going forward. It wouldn't be until January of 2020 when Fricks would attempt this track for himself and got a 43 flat on January 29th. the turns in this run were getting even tighter somehow. The last turn now turns in between this pole and the wall. Just like in Chocolate Factory, Flucks was really close to another second barrier. If someone kept playing this track for long enough, it was bound to happen. Multiple months after Flucks' first record here, on May 17th, Dillcat would start running the game and tie the record with a second 43 flat time. Flucks took notice of this, and the next day, he was determined to finally break the second barrier, as well as untie the record. With good enough driving, he was able to get a 42.96. He notes that on the final turn, he lost a slight amount of speed. This means the time is for sure improvable, but with how optimized this run was, Flucks was more than happy to let this record be. But just like before, just a month later on July 1st, Dillcat would return once again and tie the record with a second 42.96. Dill stated that he got over a dozen 43 flat times before tying the record. At this point, the record was going to take serious grinding to improve, or even tie for that matter. While making this video, both Dillcat and Flucks would push the track one frame further with a 42.93 on March 19th. A 42.90 may be possible, but it's not fully known yet. The House. The oldest and one of the first shortcut tracks in the game. On first day of attempts, I set a time of under 20 seconds with a 1983. This was pretty good for a tournament mode attempt, but this is time trials we are talking about here. Just a few days later, on August 2nd of 2019, Spiky would chop down some more time with a 1963, having just slightly better turns driving around the checkpoint. Later that day, I absolutely smashed the previous time with an 1873, making this the first 18-second time. My biggest time saves were having a quicker turnaround in the house, having a sharper and faster turn back out of the house, and intentionally swinging wider in order to cut the last turn off a bit more. This definitely saved a chunk of time over just casually taking the corner from before. I wasn't done though. A few days later, I had a minor time cut with an 1863. Over the next few days, a major discovery was found for time trialing this track. With how tight the turns were getting with better gameplay, everyone started experimenting with the second fastest kart to see how much better the track could be. The second fastest kart is the 500cc kart. It may be slightly slower than the 4x4 jet convertible, but it has way sharper turning. For a track like House that is very short with many sharp turns when using the Ultra shortcut, this would prove to be quite useful. The sharper turns outweighed the slightly slower speed. The sharp turns proved to be the most useful when turning around inside the house to activate the checkpoint. On August 8th, I would take the first slice of that pie with this new strat and get an 1850. I would also start taking the clip shortcut a bit earlier, which would evolve over time. We will quickly get back to that. A week later, Flucks would come and get an 1843 with a different kart. Flucks slowed down less around the last couple turns to beat that time. On August 27th, he would once again lower the time by a lot more with an 1826, slowing down even less around corners, and the time at this point was getting lowered quite drastically. On September 9th, Flucks would once again lower the time with an 1820. It was discovered that you can clip through this fence before even turning around the first corner. You just have to enter at the right angle and avoid this sign while getting through the corner. Using this strategy, on October 20th, I would come back and tie the record with another 1820. Wanting to keep control of the record, on the exact same day, Flucks came back and with amazing driving and sharp turning, lowered the record all the way to an 1803. At this point, you may be seeing a bit of a pattern. Flucks was getting really close to yet another second barrier. This time, it would only take him 4 days to get the first 17-second time with a 1790. The track ultimately became how quickly you could take a couple of turns with minimal slowdown in under 20 seconds. Being really hard to compete with, to this very day, the record has still not been improved, and when starting to make this video, was the oldest current record, clocking in at over 500 days old. The biggest notable improvement in this track could be using the faster kart again. In theory, the record could still be beaten with the 4x4 jet convertible. It's just a matter of how much a human could maybe handle using this kart on such a tight track. As of now, nobody has any plans to even attempt this. It's more of a theoretical idea. While messing around with the idea of using different karts, Flucks would come back around March 2021 and improve the record multiple times. He would beat the record 3 different times, first on March 8th, getting a 1773, and just a week later on March 14th, beat it by a more sizable amount with a 1756. This kind of time probably won't be beaten anytime soon, unless Flucks wants to grind this track even more, which he currently said won't be happening. Before moving on, eventually, we discussed having separate time trial leaderboards for running this track without the glitch, and it eventually became a thing. There wouldn't be any properly documented times until Flucks recorded a 1893 time on March 1st of 2021. A week later, on March 8th, he would beat this again with an 1886. More time could probably be squeezed from this, but the no-skip variant of this track has very little, or really not even any, interest. The farm. Just like every other track, the first time here is really sloppy. For a casual playthrough, it wasn't that bad, but there was still quite a lot of time to save with my first run, which clocked in at a 25:33. There are a few corners where you have to slow down and or angle yourself correctly, and this is where a lot of optimization would stem from. The next day, I would come back and slice a lot of time off with a 23:73. I saved a lot of time with the first couple turns being smoother, as well as the final turn. There was still an obvious amount of time to save though. On August 8th, I would improve yet again by a minor amount with a 23:66. I definitely had slightly better turns, but it still wasn't perfect by any means. A few days later, I swept in again and got a 23:33. The time cuts were getting bigger due to turns getting better and better. The track still wasn't close to perfect though. I was still taking a lot of the turns really safe by slowing down really hard. And this is a time trial we're talking about. Being safe and slow isn't going to lead to an optimized time. A month later, on September 9th, Flucks would come in and completely smash the time with a 22:83. The biggest notable time saves are on the last couple turns, where Flucks took sharper turns after slowing down. This alone led to a major time cut. Just a few days later, on September 13th, I would come back and achieve a 22.7 by slowing down a lot less. The gameplay was still sort of sloppy, but would stand for just over a month until October 14th, when Flucks would smash the time yet again with a 22:53. That wasn't nearly the end though, because on October 20th, he would come yet again with another major time cut and got a 22:40. He discovered that by holding A during tight turns, you can accelerate faster. This allowed the run to have a lot less slowdown. With this discovery, there was still more time to save, but that would take quite a bit. It wouldn't be until over a year later, on January 22nd, 2021, when Flucks would annihilate the record with a 22:20. By this point, the tight turns were getting quite clean, and this track finally was laid to rest. The track has been quiet since, and Flucks has no current plans to improve this. The farm has finally been cleaned. Forest. Quite a simple track, casually speaking, but you can see how this view may change the further we talk about it. The first documented time for me was a 34:40. I would quickly improve this a couple times with a 33:46 the next day, and a 32:90 the day after. The goal at this current point was to take lines as tightly as possible around the track, as well as cut as much off of the track at the very end. About a week later, on August 7th, Mecam would get a 32:66, and I would come back with a 32:60. By this point, I was starting to hug one of the corners so tight that I went between the rock at the wall, as well as a random tree branch. It was really slow and lost time, but this would be the beginning of new improvements on this track. On September 7th, Flucks would try his hand at the track and got a 32:50. He would do the same corner cut, but this time a lot faster without slowing down. I knew I could do better myself, and on September 13th, I would take the record back with a 32:46. This time I got a good corner cut and did good enough to snag the record. Eventually on October 18th, Flucks would try yet again and got a 32.43. He was able to save just a bit of time by taking the last turn tighter due to a lack of proper collision. A few days later on October 21st, Mecam would return yet again and got a 32.33. The biggest notable difference being that he skipped another corner at the beginning. This cut around the tree even tighter than before. Doing these both on a run while not slowing down made the track a lot harder. Flucks wanted to work with this new movement and eventually improved the record by a few frames with a 32.26 on February 10th of 2020. Over a year later, the record still stands here. Playing this track at a high level is quite a pain with the movements inside the trees. There is currently no interest in improving this. Being the second longest track in the game, this track had a lot of wiggle room for improvement. The first casual time I set was over 1 minute and would get quickly beaten. The next day I would get just under 1 minute, and the day after that I beat it by another second. This track was quite hard to play. The notable things to deal with were aligning up properly for hills and declines, as well as dealing with this tight turn onto this bridge. A week later, on August 11th, I would beat this time yet again by over half a second with a 58.16. I discovered that on the corner of the bridge, you can cut the turn completely and actually clip through the bridge. This removed having to take a proper turn, but added a new worry about colliding with the bridge. Flucks would throw his hand in and destroy the record by nearly a second on September 9th with a 57.26. To start, when going up hills, he decided to snake back and forth. We would eventually realize that this was slower, but at the time, we believed this to be faster. The biggest time saver here is how the bridge turn is taken. Flucks realized that if you shake the Wii remote to jump right at this turn, you can jump above the side of the bridge and avoid bonking. This allows you to take the turn while keeping all your speed. This was a mega time save. On January 29th of 2020, he would return yet again and beat the record by a tenth of a second with a 57.16. He realized that you could do something similar to the original bridge clip, but with the first bridge at the beginning of the level. This allowed you to cut the specific turn a lot more, just like the other bridge later in the level. One more time on February 10th, Flucks would come back and break another second barrier with a 56.93. You can see during these uphill sections he shakes the Wii remote to jump. This allowed him to get up these inclines slightly faster, and allowed him to probably break the last second barrier this track will ever see. Beach. Beach is quite a trickier track to optimize than it may seem. The first section is littered with tight turns and obstacles. The first time I was set was a 38.56. Out of all the first runs, this is probably one of the better ones. I didn't slow down at all, I just took all the turns very safe. A couple days later, I would get the time down to a 38.03. I actually bonked at the beginning this time, but I took some of the turns a bit tighter. For example, I jumped over this object at the end of the track. A month later, on September 7th, Flucks would yet again come along and set a time of 37.66. He took a tighter turn at the beginning and had a better turnaround in the water. He also did another jump over this tiny object at the very end. On October 17th, Flucks would try yet again and had a faster beginning as well as tighter turns entering the water section. He also took less of a wider turn in the water section and cut more off with it. These minor improvements gave him a 37.50. I returned a few days later and got a 37.40. I had a slightly better turnaround in the water section and had slightly tighter turns, which saved enough to save a few frames. Flucks stabbed right back though, and on the next day he got a 37.26. Flucks took one of the turns a lot tighter at the beginning and shaved a lot more time off at the end by taking riskier turns while jumping over the objects before the finish. Flucks thought more time could be saved though, and a few days later on October 22nd would improve the record by another frame with a 37.23. With how many variables there are on this track though, Flucks was determined to beat yet another second barrier. On October 27th, he would get another slight improvement with a 37.16. noting that having a perfect line in the water section would lead to a 36-second time. It took quite a while to see another improvement, but finally on January 29th of 2020, Flucks would return yet again and achieve a 37.06. He noted how clean the beginning of the run was, taking turns around the poles and umbrellas unbelievably tight. Exactly a month later, Flucks would return on February 29th and finally do what he set out to achieve. He had a clean beginning, a really good water section, and ended with a few more really tight turns. He achieved the first ever 36-second time with a 36.90. There really isn't any point of the run that I can label as sloppy. This is one of the cleanest runs in the game. Unless new strategies are found, attempts would have to be grinded out extensively to save more frames. Sea Carrier. Sea Carrier is debatably the jankiest track in the game. The underground section in the middle of the level is notorious for tight turns and glitchy checkpoints. On my first day of attempts, I casually got a time of just under 55 seconds. With this being a large track with many questionable sections, I instantly beat the record the next day by 3 seconds and got a 51.80. The next day, I beat it yet again with a 51.16. The first proper strategy done on this track was skipping the first turn into the underground section by driving to the right of the ramp and falling off this object. Using this, I beat the record a few days later on August 5th with a 50.86, and on August 11th beat it yet again with a 50.66. A month later on September 5th, Flucks would attempt this track and smash the record with a 50.23. Flucks saved a lot of time from having a way faster turn clip here, as well as having a cleaner ending with the last few turns. Just like other tracks, Flucks wanted to break a new second barrier, and would just barely squeeze out a sub 50-second time with a 49.96 on October 19th. Towards the beginning of the track, Flucks does a jump over this yellow bump in the road. This allows him to just move forward without slowing down, instead of taking an angled maneuver, like before. On top of this, he had a good clip again, and also was able to handle the trickier turns by using the A button to brake, the same discovery that was used on the farm. With such a complicated track and many sections, there was still more time to be improved upon. On February 29th of 2020, Flucks would come back with a time of 49.83. He stated that the beginning of this run wasn't too amazing, but was able to save it with a really clean ending. With how crazy this track was, optimizing it was quite a task. Due to this, no one paid much attention to the track for the rest of the year. It wouldn't be until over a year later, on March 2nd of 2021, that Flucks would finally make his return here. He would beat the record by quite a considerable amount with a 49.70. He had a great beginning, great turn clip, and had an amazing turn out of the underground ramp. He was able to take that turn really wide, which allowed him not to stop. He wasn't done there though. He knew there were still frames to improve with how long the track was. On March 4th, he would improve yet again with a 49.63. This time, he had yet another new strat for the final turn out of the underground. If you press either left or right on the Wii Remote, you are able to tilt your cart in that corresponding direction. Using this, he was able to take a way sharper turn and got on the red slope a lot quicker. This was just one of the first improvements. On the same day, he beat the time yet again with a 49.60, and a third time with a 49.56. Before I even say anything though, he beat it yet again another time the next day. The stars aligned that day on March 5th, and he had a great beginning, an amazing clip into the underground, great turns inside the underground, an amazing exit, and a cleaner final turn. He got a 49.26, cutting a third of a second off the record. This was pretty unexpected due to the previous improvements being by only frames. This track was looking pretty tight at this point, and that's where it currently sits. Maybe someday there will be enough improvements for a 48, but that's for the future to tell. Now we introduce maybe one of the blandest tracks in the game. The first time I set on this was a 1 minute and 3 second run. Even for a track this basic, this was really sloppy. The next day I got a 102.96, the day after I got a 102.76, and a week later, a 102.36. By this point, I had some actual proper lines around the track, including going inside the last tree for a tighter turn. On September 7th, Flucks would yet again visit another track and beat the record by a frame, with a 102.33. He decided to go for a new strategy that involved cutting this one turn by jumping in between the wall and this igloo. I came back on October 14th and used this new strategy to get a 102.20. Flucks would bounce back with a 102.13 later that same day, but I wasn't going to let that stay, and I got a 102.06 a few days later. Just the next day though, Flucks would do what he does best, break another second barrier. Flucks found out that you can save little bits of time by doing a jump at the end of the bridges in the level. These jumps aren't too horrible, but it's reliant on timing and having collisions go in your favor. Mecam would hit the scene 2 days later and take his shot. He beat the record by a couple of frames with a 101.90. He actually didn't go for the bridge jumps, he just had cleaner movement throughout the track. Knowing there was still more time to save now, Flucks came back a day later and improved by a couple more frames with a 101.83. After this, Flucks said there were probably still a few more frames to save, but he was satisfied for the current moment. 16 months later, Flucks would finally make his grand return to this track, and on February 27th of 2021, he would beat his own record by just one frame. Within a week on March 2nd, Dilcat would also return to this track and tie Flucks' record. Flucks really wanted to maintain the record on his own though, and just the next day, beat the record by yet another frame with a 101.76. But Dill wanted the record just as badly, and later that same day, tied Flucks' new time yet again. After chopping the record by many frames, this is where the record on the track currently stands. Alien Spacecraft. With yet another simplistic track, this one has the shortest history out of the entire game. The first time I set was a 33.86, and beat it the very next day with a 33.66. Flucks would swoop in on September 5th and beat the record by a frame with a 33.63. Mecam would take a shot at this track and developed a new strategy. It was found that you can jump onto the walls and ride them. Doing this on certain turns allows you to take corners tighter. This gave him a major time cut with a 32.96, breaking a new second barrier. It wouldn't be until nearly 8 months later that Flucks would tie this record on May 3rd of 2020. With a track this basic, there was very little interest in improving this. It wasn't until February 27th of 2021 when Flucks returned and was able to squeeze out one more frame. At this point, the track was pretty clean, and it's unlikely this time will be beaten, and if it somehow is, it probably won't be beaten by more than a frame or two. Alien HQ. We finally have another complicated track to talk about. This track has constant obstacles. The obstacle is not falling off and optimizing your speed on slopes. My first time here was a 47.96, and on the next day, a 47.06. On the third day, I got a 46.23. The last one wasn't highlighted, but that wouldn't matter too much, because a month later on September 5th, Flucks would one-up me with a 46.13. A month later, he played the track again and got a 45.90 on October 18th. The track had a bit of a quiet period until January 27th of 2020, when Flucks improved again with a 45.66. Flucks took advantage of the jump mechanic when going downwards and would do a jump to save bits of time. 2 days later he smashed that time with a 45.30. By this point, he was not snaking on the slopes anymore. Following the trend, Flucks would yet again push for another second barrier, and on the very next day, got a 44.93. When going up hills, he did jumps which gave him a little more speed compared to before. With how poor motion controls in the game are, his jumps actually register as 2 jumps on these inclines. He would keep grinding the track further and further, and on February 9th got a 44.63. His major change here was not doing jumps when going down hills. he figured out it was a better idea just to focus on better turns. Jumping can make it harder to angle yourself throughout the track. On March 18th, he was finally able to pull out a 4460 with slightly better gameplay. Frick says that a 0.5 time is on the table, and may go for it in the future. Abstract World. On day 1, I got a 4140, and the next day, I got a 41 flat. Later that same day, Swaggy would throw his skills onto the track and smash my time with a 4036. He took advantage of going on top of the sides of the track and did so at the beginning, as well as a little section in the middle. This saved a lot of time over my previous runs. I came back the next day with that knowledge and got a time just under 40 seconds with a 39.93. Swaggy followed later in the day with a 39.90. I wanted to have the record by the end of the day, so I came back yet again and got a 39.70. Most of the improvements at this point were just cleaner lines. A few days later, I improved by another frame with a 39.66, and then got a 39.53 with notably tighter turns at the end. The next day on August 6, Swaggy would return once more and got a decent time cut with a 39.33. He realized you could jump onto the land on the right near the finish line. This allowed you to take the turn way tighter than ever thought before, and it allowed you to land closer to the finish line when ending the track. The next day, I took his strategy and tied the record, and the next day, I improved it by another frame with even better gameplay. After this, the track finally went quiet for a few weeks. It wouldn't be until September 7th that Fricks would try this track out. He achieved a 39.23, getting slightly better movement when jumping. Over a month later, on October 17th, I would return yet again and tie the record for another time. Fricks was determined to keep it untied though, and the next day smashed that time with a 39.10, while having some slightly better movement, like having a different strategy going uphill at the beginning, and after this, Fricks decided to put the track down for a while. It wasn't until February 27th of 2021 that Fricks would come once again and beat the record by a frame. Over the following days, he had 2 more minor time cuts with a 39.03, and not that long after, a 39 flat. He had some new approaches going through the track, such as tilting the cart and shaking for a jump on the beginning of the uphill section. Frick states that a 38-second time is very possible due to his speed dipping slightly below in different areas. The only question was when. When making this video, on March 19th, Fricks would break the second barrier and finally got a 38.96. That was just the beginning of the track though. The night before, Fricks found a way to clip out of bounds near the finish line, and over the next day was able to figure out how to save time using it. Flipping out of bounds here allows you to drive beneath the track and allows you to drive anywhere you want. With knowledge of where the checkpoints are, you can maneuver below the track to activate them quicker. And right away, Fricks beat the no glitch record by over a second with a 37.86. With how new the glitch is as of making this video, the record will, and did, get lowered many times. Maybe we'll talk about that in a future video. Chocolate Volcano. Going with one of the most basic circle tracks in the game, the history of this track is more than basic. Over the first couple days, I would get a 26.56 and a 25.96. Swaggy would also throw attempts into the track and beat me by a couple frames with a 25.90. Later the same day, I would improve by another frame with a 25.86. The war would continue with Swaggy getting a 25.83, me getting a 25.80, and then Swaggy and I both getting 25.76 times. A month later, Fricks wanted a piece of this track and got a 25.70. The only thing to say about strats at this point is that Fricks realized that you could jump over these chocolate mounds to cut the corners a bit. A couple days later, Fricks would optimize these jumps to get a 25.56. A month later, on October 17th, I would tie the record yet again. Like usual, Flucks came back the next day and squeezed enough time to achieve a 25:53. What happened next was completely unexpected. Just a week later, on October 24th, Flucks would set the first time on the track with a new ultra shortcut. Flucks discovered that you can jump to the land in the middle of the track and perform a couple more jumps to make it back to the finish line. After doing this, you have to drive far enough back to activate the last checkpoint, and then you can cross the finish line. This saves less time than you would expect from an ultra shortcut due to the route needed, but nonetheless, it was a time save. At this time, Flucks was happy to simply set a new major record with a new ultra shortcut and let the track be for a while. Wanting to finally improve, all the way on February 27th, 2021, Flucks would return and try the shortcut once again and got a 25 flat. A new second barrier was inevitable. Over the next couple weeks, Flucks would tamper with the shortcut and optimize its usage. Later the same day, he got a 2486 with better driving, and in March, he would return on the 5th and got a 2473. A couple days later, he improved it even more with a 2453. He was able to save time with a sharper turn and a second jump to climb even further on the chocolate mound than originally expected. Flucks over the next few days would keep tinkering with the checkpoints and made another huge discovery. He discovered that you can skip across the track in the opposite direction when starting the track. You can drive backwards to a checkpoint and then drive forward and perform the original shortcut as done before. This was enough time saved to give him the first 23-second time with a 23:93. With this huge discovery, he kept lowering the time. On the same day, he got a 23:10, 23:06, and finally, a 23 flat. He took a day off and then came back on March 13th to break yet another second barrier with optimizations using the new glitch setup and got a 22:83, and that's where the track currently stands. At this point, the main improvement will be taking the checkpoint turns as quickly as possible. With major glitch optimizations in this track, it was decided that a no-skip variant of this track should exist, just like the house. Since discovering the glitch, the non-glitch record has been improved a few times. Flucks has lowered the time a few times using the discovery mentioned before, where you can cut more of the corner off at the beginning. Dill would beat Flucks' time by a couple frames, and the same day, Flucks would tie him, leaving the record at a tied 25:20. Coliseum. Continuing the circle trend, let's talk about Coliseum. My first couple times were a 29:46 and a 28:90. Swaggy would come the next day and smash my time with a 28:46, having notably cleaner turns. The same day, I would take notes and get a 28:30. I took turns around the tunnel even tighter than before. A few days later, Swaggy and I kept competing back and forth and got a 28:16 on the same day. Later the same day, I wanted to remove this tie and improved by 1 frame with a 28:13. Flucks would come yet again in September and got a 1 frame improvement of his own with a 28:10. By this point, we were hugging the walls throughout the track. MINISTYR decided to try this track out as well and improved the time by another frame with a 28:06. He notably got a way better tunnel entrance. It wouldn't be a month later until October 20th that I would come back and tie the record once again. Like many times before, that wouldn't last for quite long. On October 22nd, MINISTYR returned and got a 1 frame improvement again with a 28:03. It would take quite a bit, but on December 27th, I would finally match that time, and on January 30th of 2020, Flucks would also return and tie that time as well, making it a 3-way tie. A week or so later, on February 9th, Flucks would grind the track further and finally improve the record by more than a frame, this time by 2 frames. Flucks spent a lot of time optimizing both the entrance and ending of the tunnel and got the first 27-second time with a 27:96. It took quite a while, but after multiple sessions, I would return on April 27th and tied the record for another time. With how basic the track is, it's predicted that maybe 1 or 2 frames at most could be saved with currently known strategies, and that's where that record currently stands. the Stadium. Now for the most basic circle track out of all of them. Over the next few days, I lowered the time many times. I first got a 30:36, followed by a 30:30, and after that got a 29:93, and finally a 29:90. Flucks would come a couple weeks later on August 15th and tie the record, and a few weeks later got a 29:83. This track was quite a pain to grind, because throughout the track, there is random collision that can slow you down. Getting the record requires being close to the wall, but being closer increases the chances of these random collisions. A month later, a new setup was found to clip through the last tire near the finish line, and October 14th I took the record back with a 29:76. Improving upon this, a week later on October 20th, both Flucks and Mecam would get a 29:73. I would take a break from this track for quite a while, but eventually came back on December 28th, and after some grinding, I tied the record once again, leading to another 3-way tie. Times on this track would get quite quiet for many months, but during 2020, it was realized that a couple of these 29:73 times had quite noticeable slowdowns which came from poor collisions involving the tires. Knowing this, I started grinding out the track, and after many attempts was finally able to squeeze out another frame and got a 29:70. A couple days later, Flucks tried the same thing and tied the record. To this day, that's where the record currently stands. With how basic the track is, this could be the last possible frame for a human to save. This track feels like the equivalent of a perfect run in Dragster. For those not aware, multiple humans have tied the record in the game with a time of 5.57, and even a tool-assisted speedrun cannot beat this time. It may be the same exact situation here. At most, players believe that another frame on Stadium could possibly be saved with the right luck with the right setup, but there is no way that much more besides that could possibly happen. Nearly 3 years after Back's tournament mode record, there was finally new competition in the category. On February 27th of 2020, Flucks would beat Back's 2017 record by less than a second, but there was one huge issue. The recording didn't save properly. Due to stream lag and a lack of local recording till halfway through, there is a solid 30 plus seconds of missing footage halfway throughout the run. Due to this, it was hard to calculate a proper ending time, and the community agreed to not allow the run, including Flucks himself. It was quite sad to see a new possible record not be counted due to a lack of full proof. The category would go quiet for yet another year. At the beginning of 2021, I made a subscriber incentive on my Twitch channel that if I reached it, I would return to M&M's Kart Racing and grind tournament mode until I got the record back. That goal would eventually be reached, and in February, on day 1, I had already gotten a time below 34 minutes with a time of 33:58. The next day was even crazier. That stream on February 24th, I would get a 33:52, a 33:49, and while being on another good run, Dillcat was also doing attempts and beat Back's record by 3 seconds with a 33:45. That was just the beginning though. Remember how I said I was in the middle of a good run? I got news of that record 25 minutes into an attempt that was also on a good pace. At that moment, I knew what I needed to do. Play good enough to beat both Back and Dill at the same exact time. What followed was the best ending to a tournament mode run I had ever gotten. Gold after gold after gold. Just 9 minutes after Dill set the record, I beat it again myself with a 33:43. After 4 years, I had finally set a record in the category again, and beat the latest record just 9 minutes afterwards. My goal was to get just the record one more time. I don't even care if one of you guys beats the record tomorrow and gets like a 33:39. My goal was just to get the record again once. That was my goal. Dill decided to keep doing runs, and the next day he would smash my time with a 33:35. Dill's record still struggled a bit in some levels, such as Alien HQ, but made up with it in better gameplay, such as in Coliseum. This run made the category a little bit quiet again, but behind the scenes, Flucks was starting to grind runs again. Out of nowhere, on March 8th, Flucks absolutely demolished the record with a 33.09. The reason why Flucks grinded for a long time and eventually got a mega world record was due to all the strategies he was going for. Due to optimizing all the time trial records, he had a huge advantage with optimizing lines and being comfortable with harder strats. He went for tricks such as the clip in Chocolate Factory every single lap, and even went for Chocolate Volcano glitch on lap 1. He discovered the glitch was actually easier in tournament mode due to being able to use a teacup as a boost into the shortcut. After this major time cut, Dill would keep grinding and got multiple PBs. Eventually, on March 15th, Dill would finally just barely best Flucks and got a 33.08. He didn't go for Chocolate Factory clip or Chocolate Volcano glitch. He was able to barely just beat the world record with better lines. At this point, the category was getting lowered a lot by using cleaner driving that is similar to what is done in time trials. On top of this, more time save can be added if the Chocolate Volcano shortcut was used more than once. And the new abstract glitch can save upwards of 10 to 20 seconds when applied over 3 laps. A 32-minute time is looking more likely than ever, but for now, we'll have to wait and see what the future holds. Before I end, I would like to address the glitchiness of the game as a whole. On top of the currently known shortcuts, there is more to unpeel to this scrambled mess of a game. There have been many different discoveries and theories over the years. One of the weirdest things to talk about is a glitch in the house. No, not the glitch from before. There's another one here. If you tilt your card at just the right place and just the right time in-house, the console will randomly crash. This happens both on the Wii and Wii U, and to this day, no one knows why. With current knowledge, this is the only way to make the game crash. I doubt this is useful at all, but maybe one day we'll know the reason why this happens. For now at least, a couple of people have been running a category that requires crashing the game as quickly as possible, and it became its own category. Currently, Adam S has the record with a time of 29.2. The next thing I want to talk about is the discovery of a hidden mechanic in the game. One day, when doing time trials, I messed around with the Wii remote and held down every button at once. For no reason at all, a loading screen started up, and it started the next track in the game. Messing around with this more, I realized that pressing minus, B, and 1 all at the same time activates a track skip. This allows you to skip from track to track without going back to the main menu and selecting a different one. I explored further, and when activating this debug mechanic on Stadium, the last track in the game, it decides to load something quite different. What is this, you may ask? This is the same screen that loads on the title screen. Driving to a specific corner activates the end of the race. I decided to keep using this debug code on this glitch track over and over again, and it got even weirder. The name of the track kept changing every time I restarted. First, it cycles through all the track names in German, and for some reason makes your character invisible for just one track only. It secondly does all the names in French, then in Spanish, and afterwards in Italian. After the shifting of languages, other weird things start to happen. It first displays no name, and then afterwards it displays random characters, generally starting with the letter A. It eventually just starts displaying garbage, like whatever this is. One even includes an icon for an A button on the Wii. While doing this trick with CPU players, they start spazzing out in random places. And that's where the weird mystery is currently stuck at. I'm quite curious to know what the random track names were displaying, but it seems to be more than likely that after a certain point, the game just started reading random code. Besides the currently known glitches in this run, there have been some weird out-of-bounds discoveries, as well as some random collisions in this game. Starting with something really interesting about CPUs. Their collision is really unique. There have been a few instances of CPUs just simply driving through the wall on streets. But that's just the beginning though. One day, when doing tournament mode attempts, I was playing on Coliseum and seemed to randomly clip out of bounds in the tunnel and fall below the track. Going back through the footage, it seems like this one CPU player was able to push me out of bounds. I have not been able to redo this in a run since. What can we take out of this though? CPUs may be able to assist in out-of-bounds glitches that can't be done in time trials. Besides CPUs going out of bounds, there have been some other out-of-bounds discoveries that have not led to much. Two big examples are this section on the streets, as well as many different places in the farm. To this day, nothing else has been developed. And this is where I present something to you. Yes, you, the viewer watching at home. I am putting up a $100 bounty for this game. The first person that can discover some new major shortcut, or find a new useful game-breaking discovery about this game, will receive $100. Some things we are looking for are new out-of-bounds glitches that can be used to complete faster laps in time trials, as well as disassembling how the checkpoint system works. If you are interested in contributing and have any questions and or discoveries, you can join the M&M Discord server that will be linked both down below in the description and in the comments. And if you need to reach out to me somewhere else, feel free to poke me on Twitter and or Discord. Those links will be there as well. The race is on for the next improvement in the greatest game of all time, M&M's Kart Racing. Thank you for watching.